So there's a few things that I want to address with respect to responses I've received from some members of the Star Trek fan base in relation to my criticism of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And the first one is that I've criticized the show for doing too many goofy comedy, gimmicky episodes per season. Star Trek has always had these types of episodes, although not quite like the ones on Strange New Worlds, which is another part of the issue that I have with the show. Star Trek has done comedy holodeck episodes, and it's done episodes where the godlike being Q has, done some, quirky, funny, goofy things, or has in the case of Star Trek: The Next Generation, he turned them all into characters from Robin Hood and brought them to Sherwood Forest and things like that. We've had comedy episodes, we've had offbeat and sort of paradigm changing episodes in all of these shows, where there's been, format breakers, as I would call them. And there's nothing wrong with occasionally having that. They make for an interesting diversion from the usual situations that the crew of, DS9 or Voyager Enterprise might encounter. And those are welcome diversions, I think, for fans as well. And, in the interests of doing something like a musical episode, for example, well, there was a scene in Star Trek Voyager where the EMH doctor is daydreaming and he's singing to the crew, and it's like he's singing as if it's in dialogue kind of thing. So, but that was a daydream, and it was in this lighthearted episode. It wasn't supposed to be like a straight up musical episode. And I think motivation and proportionality are two key areas here for me to get into. And the first one is, when it comes to motivation, the writers of Strange New Worlds did that episode, Subspace Rhapsody, which was a total musical episode, because they were inspired by Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the Joss Whedon written and directed episode from the 6th season of Buffy, which was called Once More with Feeling. And that's what they were drawing inspiration from. And I have a problem with that, because to me, Star Trek is the benchmark. I don't think that Star Trek should be drawing inspiration from other franchises in that way. In particular, Buffy and also its sister series, Angel, were, I guess, in many respects, by comparison to Star Trek at that point in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were kind of like the young up-and-coming franchise in a respect. So Star Trek was very well established already, and already a cultural icon, and considered very highbrow, high-quality science fiction. I acknowledge that Buffy and Angel are not really science fiction, although they are kind of in that general categorization, I suppose. But they are more horror, paranormal, supernatural, fantasy shows. But I just don't think that Star Trek should be looking to emulate them. And I loved Buffy and Angel very much. I thought they were fantastic shows. I actually grew to prefer Angel by the end. But I always thought that Star Trek was sort of the gold standard of science fiction. And that's why it kind of troubles me that modern writers sort of show really what they're showing their own inspirations, and they're not drawing inspirations from what I think Star Trek writers should be drawing inspiration from, which is, it doesn't, even if it's not other Star Trek shows, at least draw inspiration from, very highbrow, cerebral science fiction stories and novels, for example, because Star Trek should be, I think Star Trek's storytelling should be more sophisticated and nuanced than that. But anyway, that's just my opinion. And another example of this recently is that it's been announced for the 4th season of Strange New Worlds, we're going to have another gimmick episode, which is that the crew are going to be turned into puppets. Now, if you told me this about 2 years ago, I would have been pretty shocked, but nothing surprises me about this show anymore. This again comes down to proportionality, and to address that, where in the 80s and 90s, early 2000s Star Trek, so TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, they were doing 22 to 26 episode seasons, and there might be like 2 or 3 episodes at most per year that were kind of comedic episodes, and the rest were serious. Whereas Strange New Worlds, only does 10 episodes per year, and like 3 of them are just spoofs. Yeah, and this is the key. It's not just that they're light-hearted episodes, and that's just too much. That ratio is too much. It's too high. You know, when almost a third of the season is just written off as gimmick episodes, I mean, that's just too high. We've had Spock turned into a human and played for laughs. We've had, a very meta, self-aware episode. It's very self-reverential episode where we had the crew of two characters of Lower Decks. The animated show, which I have a big problem with as well. It's over now. And they came on to Strange New Worlds. They were brought into the future. They crossed over. And then we had the musical. And now we're having a puppet episode. You know, I have my issues with Lower Decks for a number of reasons. And not least of which, I don't have a problem with animated Star Trek. I loved the original animated show. Which, had some goofy, quirky moments and jokes in there. But it was mostly a serious, quite intelligent animated show with some really great sci-fi concepts in there that appealed to families. You know, it appealed to kids, young adults, and adults, right? When you start going into things like the Lower Decks show, which is a comedy, it's a comedy. It's not just an animated show, right? And it's done in the style of Rick and Morty. So again, they're getting inspiration from something else that isn't Star Trek. Okay, so we're just sort of moving further away from the identity of Star Trek. And it's full of references, right? That's the big thing. It's full of sort of member-berry references, and it's very self-aware, and it's almost like Deadpool in a way. You know, they're only short of just looking directly at the camera, and that's what frustrates me. I don't think Star Trek should be getting into self-reverential, meta commentary and spoof and parody. It's becoming a self-parody, right? That's the issue, and that's what they're getting into with the likes of their musical episode on Strange New Worlds, this Subspace Rhapsody episode, which again was inspired by Buffy, right? You have a sequence where Pike hails a Klingon ship, and there's a scene where there's a Klingon boy band, a hip hop boy band. Singing, they're not even singing Klingon opera. Okay, they're singing like it's the Backstreet Boys or something, and there are fans who just find this the most hilarious thing ever and think it's great, and they totally miss the point, because to them it's like you're taking this too seriously. It's all just a joke. Nothing seems to matter. Standards are just completely gone out the window. We're not supposed to care about anything. We're not supposed to hold any standards, it seems. And then they'll complain that I don't like anything, and I seem to complain about all these things. It's like, what are you talking about? I don't like anything. I love The Next Generation, the original series, the original animated series, which New Trek parodied recently with the very short treks, Remember the episode where Riker and Crusher go down and meet aliens who pick their nose and put boogers everywhere and eat their boogers or something? It's hilarious, fantastic, wow, really highbrow stuff. It's exactly what Gene Roddenberry envisaged for Star Trek, isn't it? I love DS9, I love Voyager, I love Enterprise. I love at least 9 of the 10 original Star Trek films, from motion picture all the way to Nemesis. I have a soft spot for even Star Trek V and Nemesis, and my favorite Trek movies are Star Trek the Motion Picture, Star Trek 2, 4. There's plenty there that I love. But what's been made since Star Trek 2009? No, I don't. And so it's kind of shocking to me that there's a vocal percentage of the audience base in comment sections and on social media that as soon as you explain these things, as soon as you explain why what we're getting is not really Star Trek and not really true to the ethos of Star Trek and what you believe that Star Trek is supposed to be. Look, we're getting a far lower quality product these days, and one that does a lot of DEI pandering, and one that is filled with characters that are more concerned with their feelings as opposed to intellectual philosophy and problem solving, right? And it's not particularly, Disparu did a very good video discussing this recently, and I think you should check that out. I'll leave it linked below in the description box. But Star Trek is just, it's become something else, and it's doesn't really look like Star Trek. It doesn't really, the characters don't sound like the Star Trek characters, but it's still called Star Trek. You know, and a great example of this is in this recent Starfleet Academy trailer. So this new Star Trek Starfleet Academy show, and the trailer is peppered with callbacks, a little bit of member berries and sort of things like that. You know, here's a picture of Cisco and what happened to him and this sort of stuff. And then they have like a wall with famous names of, I guess, Starfleet alumni from the past. And at the bottom of it, at the bottom of the shot, you have, I think, a lineup of about 17 or 18 cadets, I guess. And about 13 or 14 of them are women. And it's like, what do you think that is? You know, can we maybe unpack why? Because that was a choice, and it's interesting to question, why do you think that the makers of the show made that particular choice? Well, we could get into that, but a lot of these same people who sort of clap back at me, you know, they put the shields up, so to speak, and they don't want to go there. And in the meantime, so this totally unrecognizable show it gives you these little key jangling moments where they go, oh, look at this, Tasha Yar, you know, you like Tasha Yar, you like Riker, don't you? Oh, Charles Tucker, you know, oh, Data, you know, just put some names up. Oh, Bashir, his name is on the wall as well. You just put the names up there, and then it becomes fodder for people who literally just consume any product, right, with the name of their favorite franchise. It is literally the meme. Consume product, get excited for next product. Any old slop they will consume, so long as they're just given enough of these cheap little sort of little bit of bait. That's all it is. It's a total bait and switch. It's called Star Trek. We gave you a reference to Kirk. We threw up some names there on a wall. You know, there's some reference to Cisco there. Now you'll watch it, won't you? Because it's Star Trek. And then you sit down and watch it, and it's not Star Trek. It doesn't feel like Star Trek. It doesn't sound like Star Trek. The characters don't act like they're Star Trek characters. That's the issue, and I don't know how you get through to that section of the fan base, but it's there. I've seen it there in Star Wars. I've seen it there in Doctor Who as well, where, I mean, it's just Doctor Who was really bad. Like every episode of the Ncuti Gatwa era to these people was like beyond reproach. You know, they just thought it was perfect. You're like, are you serious? So there you go. That's the situation. We're gonna get a Strange New Worlds puppet episode. Why? Well, of course we're gonna get a puppet episode. Not because Star Trek does comedy goofy episodes, but because modern Star Trek has become a joke. A puppet episode? Really? Well, I wonder why. Gee, I wonder, does it have anything to do with, again, the writers drawing inspiration from the Buffyverse, from the Joss Whedon Buffyverse? There was an episode in the 5th season of Angel, which I think was probably its second strongest. I think it's, well, probably the first 2 seasons of Angel I think are very strong, but I think the second season was the best of the show, and the 5th season was probably second place. The 5th season had an episode called Smile Time, episode 14, where Angel gets turned into a puppet. That's magic, right? And you can kind of do those kind of things on Buffy and Angel and get away with it in a way that I don't buy it on a show like Star Trek. Star Trek shouldn't try to be something like Buffy and Angel, because it's a different type of fantasy. It's science fiction. It's a different type of lore and world entirely. But yeah, I mean, the other brigade that you get a lot of criticism from is people who are just telling you that you're looking too deeply into it. It doesn't matter. I resent being told that I'm looking too deeply into things and that I'm nitpicking or any of this kind of stuff, you know. And so when I criticize modern Star Trek, it's done with a love for what went before and a sense of a little bit of ownership of it, and being a Star Trek fan, being protective of what went before and the quality of what we used to have that we now don't have from, I believe, showrunners, producers, writers who don't really intimately know or love Star Trek in the way that I think their predecessors on previous shows during the golden era of Star Trek did. I think there were people there who had a very different mindset in terms of the values that they brought to Star Trek, but also how the show was run. And that's just not the case now. So puppet episodes for season 4. I'm sure there's going to be people who are going to hoot and holler about this. And again, it's all just a big gag, because that's all that Star Trek has really been reduced to now, is being like a cheap feels over reels CW-esque show aimed more at a modern audience. And yeah, I guess it's just not made for me anymore. So there you go. Thanks very much for watching. I look forward to your thoughts in the comments below. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.